My husband stole the Christmas present I bought for our son to give to his nephew, saying he mattered more. My name is Lindsay, and I used to think the hardest part of marriage was the boring stuff. Rent, groceries, whose turn it was to deal with the leaking sink, the kind of arguments that start with a sigh and end with someone sleeping too close to the edge of the bed. Turns out the hardest part is watching the person you built your life with treat your kid like an optional add-on and still expect you to clap for it. I was a department store manager in a mid-sized city in the United States, which is a fancy way of saying I spent most days on my feet, smiling at people who were mad at me for things I didn't personally invent. I did schedules, inventory drama, and the never-ending parade of can you just make it work. I made decent money compared to when I started, but it never felt like we're safe money. It felt like we can survive if nobody gets sick and the car behaves money. My husband worked as a warehouse supervisor. He liked to call it operations, like that made it less exhausting. It was long shifts, steel-toed boots, and a constant low-level anger that he pretended was confidence. He wasn't a monster. That's what made it worse. He could be funny. He could be tender. He could fold laundry while telling our son dumb jokes, and then, without blinking, he could choose his brother and his nephew over us like it was a moral duty. He lost his mom when he was a kid. His dad was physically present and emotionally absent, like he was physically there but mentally checked out. My husband and his brother grew up in that house clinging to each other, and I understand that. When you grow up feeling unwanted, you take loyalty wherever you can find it, and you squeeze until it hurts. The problem was he kept squeezing me and our son to keep his brother afloat. His brother had always been going through something. That was the family phrase. Going through something meant he couldn't keep a job for long, couldn't pay rent on time, and always had a new friend group that sounded like trouble. He wasn't out committing movie crimes. He was just messy in a way that ruins other people's lives. Late rent, unpaid tickets, lost jobs, missed court dates for dumb stuff like driving without insurance. He'd swear he was turning it around, then call crying about how the world was against him. He had a son, my husband's nephew, who was bright, athletic, and charming in that way that makes adults lean in and say, "That kid is going places." He was the starting guard on the school team. The kid teachers praised, the kid recruiters came to watch, and my husband loved him like a second chance at childhood. Like if he could help this boy make it would erase everything ugly about how he and his brother grew up. Meanwhile, our son was the kind of kid who tried hard in quiet ways. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the star of a team. He liked photography and science projects and building things out of cardboard just to see if he could. He also had this habit of blaming himself for other people's moods, which is a thing I noticed and hated and still didn't fully know how to fix. He was 13 then, right on the edge of becoming a teenager, and already carrying too much. It started with money, because it always starts with money when people want to pretend it's about love. One afternoon, I was in the break room at work, eating a sad sandwich and staring at my phone, when an alert popped up from our bank app. Not fraud, not someone stole your identity, just one of those unusual account activity notifications that makes your stomach drop anyway. I opened it and saw a transfer from our joint account. Same amount as the last transfer. Same recipient name, his brother. I scrolled. There were more, every couple of weeks, always 500, always neat, always silent. The worst part wasn't even the number. It was the feeling of being handled, like I was the person who kept the lights on while he played hero somewhere else. When I got home, he was on the couch in his work pants, shoes still on, watching something and laughing like the world was fine. I stood in the doorway for a second, just watching him exist in peace while my brain did math. "Hey," I said. He didn't look away from the screen. "Hey, how long have you been sending money to your brother?" That got his attention. He paused, slow and annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the transfers, the ones you didn't mention, the ones I found because the app basically yelled at me." He rubbed his face. "It's not a big deal." "That's always your first sentence," I said. "It's like a prayer." He gave me that shrug. That lazy, innocent-looking shrug that said, "I'm not doing anything wrong. You're just being dramatic." "He needed help," he said. "And before you start, yes, I know we have bills, but we're fine." "We are not fine," I snapped, and immediately hated that my voice went sharp. I didn't want to be the mom who sounds like a cornered animal, but I also didn't want to be the wife who smiles while someone quietly drains her life. He leaned back. "It's my brother, Lindsay." "I know who he is," I said. "He's the guy we've been paying rent for like he's our dependent." "You're exaggerating." "I'm reading numbers," I said. "That's not exaggeration." He sighed like he was the victim of my personality. You don't understand. When we were kids, I promised him I'd never let him fall. Okay, I said, forcing my breathing to slow. But you didn't promise that with my paycheck. And you didn't ask me. You just did it. His jaw tightened. If I had asked, you would have said no. Because it's not fair, I said. Because we have a kid. He stood, irritation rising. You're making it sound like I'm stealing. I stared at him. If you move money out of a joint account without telling the other person, what word would you like me to use? He didn't answer. He grabbed his phone and went to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, he came back and asked what was for dinner, as if we were a normal couple and not a couple actively cracking down the middle. That night, my son asked very quietly, "Are you mad at Dad because of me?" Like the money leaving our account could somehow be his fault. No, I told him. This has nothing to do with you. He nodded like he believed me, but his shoulders stayed tight. Kids aren't dumb. They feel the temperature of a house. The next morning at work, I kept smiling at customers while my brain replayed my son's face from the night before. I was doing returns, answering questions, pretending I wasn't a mess, when my phone buzzed again. Another transfer notification. 500. Same day. He'd never broken the every couple of weeks pattern before. This one felt deliberate, like he wanted me to see it and stop questioning him. I called the bank to ask if anything looked off with my paycheck. The woman on the line was polite and painfully calm. She explained joint accounts like I was 5. Either person could move money. If I wanted control, I needed my own account. So on my lunch break, I walked into the bank with my manager badge still clipped to my shirt and opened a separate checking account. I rerouted my direct deposit that same afternoon, sitting in my tiny office at work, hands trembling as I typed. It wasn't divorce yet, but it was my first real no. When my husband noticed a couple of paychecks later, he accused me of hiding money. I told him I was protecting our household. He called me selfish. I told him his brother could learn the definition of that word the day he stopped taking ours. After that, I started watching the account like a hawk. I hated the person it turned me into. I didn't want to be a wife who played detective. But every time we got close to catching up on bills, another 500 disappeared. My husband would say things like, "It's temporary," and "You're overthinking," and "He'll pay it back." And then he'd come home with a new story about his brother needing just one more month. I asked what the brother was spending it on. "Rent," he said too fast. Then, a week later, it was a car repair. Then it was child support stuff. Then it was, he's between jobs. It was always a reason, never a plan. A few weeks later, we had a neighborhood barbecue. Not a big one. A few relatives, a couple neighbors, folding chairs, cheap paper plates, the smell of meat on a grill. My husband's brother came, of course, with his son. The nephew walked in like he owned the air. He was 16, already built like a grown man, already used to adults calling him sir in that joking way. He had a bright smile and a way of talking that made people listen. I'll give him that. He was good at being impressive. My son stayed close to me, hovering like he didn't trust the room to be safe. He tried to be polite. He tried to be normal. He was doing everything right and still looked like he was bracing for impact. At one point, an aunt said, "He's got your mannerisms," nodding at the nephew and then at my husband. "Same grin." My husband laughed, big and proud. "That's natural. He's basically my second kid." It was like he'd embarrassed my kid in front of everyone without even raising his voice. He froze, then backed away without a word and disappeared into his room. Just gone. No scene, no shouting, just removed. Later, when the yard finally emptied and I could breathe, I cornered my husband in the kitchen. "What the hell was that?" I hissed. He blinked. "What was what?" "You called your nephew your second kid in front of our actual kid." He rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, it was a compliment." "It was not a compliment to our son. You're turning one sentence into a whole thing," he said, voice dripping with that sarcasm that always made me feel small. "He's sensitive. You baby him. You humiliated him," I said, "and you didn't even see it." He waved me off. "He'll get over it." That night, I knocked on my son's door. "Can I come in?" He answered. "Sure," but his voice sounded like a wall. He was sitting on his bed staring at his phone, not even scrolling, just holding it like a shield. "I heard," he whispered. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." He shrugged in the smallest way. "It's fine." I hated that phrase. I hated how it was infecting him. 3 weeks after that barbecue, my work sent me on a short trip. 3 days. Nothing glamorous, just meetings and a hotel room that smelled like old carpet. My son had a science project due, one of those big ones that requires poster boards and patience, and at least one adult who doesn't disappear. My husband promised he'd spend Sunday helping. Saturday night, my son texted him, "What time are we starting tomorrow?" No answer. Sunday morning, another text. Still nothing. Then my son messaged me, "Dad's not here." I called my husband and it went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I left a message I'm not proud of. Then I called my son and told him to start without waiting. "I'll talk you through it," I said, even though I was sitting in a meeting room with coworkers who expected me to be present. That evening, my son sent me a screenshot from a social media app. A photo of my husband sitting in the bleachers at a school gym, smiling next to his brother, with a man in a jacket talking to them. The nephew was in the background, arms crossed, looking pleased with himself. When my husband finally answered, it was after dark. "Hey," he said, casual. "Where are you?" I asked. "At the gym," he said, like that was a normal answer when your kid is home alone with a half-built science project. "You promised him," I said. He sighed. A recruiter showed up. So this matters," he snapped. "Full scholarship. Do you know what that saves? That helps all of us." "All of us," I said. And even as the words left my mouth, I heard how ridiculous they sounded. Like my son's needs were a footnote to a plan my husband wrote for someone else's kid. When I got home 2 days later, I found my son at our kitchen table with tape and glue everywhere, eyes red, shoulders tight. He lifted the project and said, "I tried." Something in me cracked. By the time his 14th birthday rolled around, he didn't ask for a big thing. He asked for something small. A few hours at a local arcade place with 3 friends. That's it. He didn't want a crowd. He wanted a day where he wasn't competing with his cousin for basic attention. My husband insisted on booking it. "I'll handle it," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he could still show up. 2 days before the party, he mentioned the nephew had been accepted into a competitive summer academic program. "That's great," I said, cautious. He nodded, already smiling. "We should celebrate him too." "No," I said immediately. "This is our son's birthday." "It's just adding a little something," he said like I was being unreasonable. "It always starts as a little something," I said. And then my kid disappears into his bedroom again. He accused me of being jealous of a teenager, which is a wild thing to say out loud, but he said it with a straight face. The day before the party, while I was at work, he called and canceled the arcade reservation. I found out because the place called me to confirm the cancellation, and I stood behind my customer service desk feeling my face burn. When I got home, he was already inviting people over. His brother, the nephew's friends, people I didn't even know. He'd turned my son's birthday into a house event centered on the nephew's achievements, like my child's request didn't matter because it wasn't impressive enough. The next day, my son's 3 friends arrived, awkward and polite, carrying small gifts. The nephew arrived with 6 friends, loud and confident, and immediately took over the living room like it was his stage. My husband kept taking photos of the nephew, posting them, laughing, making jokes about discipline and hard work, and setting an example. My son tried to smile. His friends kept looking at me confused. One of them whispered, "Is this normal?" And I had to swallow my answer. We sang happy birthday. My son blew out candles on a plain cake. My husband clapped twice, distracted. Then he walked into the kitchen and came back carrying a second, bigger cake with the nephew's name written on it and frosting, themed like the nephew's sport. I watched my son's face shut down in real time. Not angry, not crying, just gone. After everyone left, I confronted my husband so hard my voice shook. "You ruined his birthday," I said. "I gave him a party," he said, defensive. "You gave him a humiliation," I said. "You made his day about someone else." He leaned against the counter. "He needs to learn how winners think. He needs a father," I snapped, "not a coach for someone else's kid." That fight lasted until midnight. It ended the way they always did. My husband claiming I was too emotional, me feeling like I was screaming into a pillow, and my son lying in his room listening to both of us fail him in different ways. After the canceled arcade mess, I did something I should have done from the start. I asked my son what he still wanted. Not what his dad wanted, not what looked good on social media, what he wanted. He said, "I just wanted to go play games with my friends." So the next weekend, I took him anyway. Just us, his 3 friends, and a stack of discount cards I bought with my employee perk. No big speeches, no surprise guests, no second cake. I sat at a table with a soda and listened to teenagers argue about which game counts as skill. I watched my son actually laugh, when he beat his friend at air hockey by 1 point and then pretended it was an accident so his friend wouldn't feel bad. On the drive home, he said, "That was nice. Nice. That was the word. Not magical, not healed, but nice." And I remember thinking, if I can give him nice without his father, what exactly am I keeping this marriage for? After that birthday, my son stopped asking for things. That's the part people don't always understand. Kids don't keep begging forever. They try, they get hurt, and then they stop. They go quiet in a way that isn't peaceful. It's resignation. Over the next 2 years, my son worked little jobs where he could. Cutting grass, helping neighbors carry groceries, pet sitting. He saved every dollar in a cheap lockbox he kept in his closet. He didn't trust our joint account. He didn't trust his father. He barely trusted the house. He wanted a better camera. Not a luxury brand. Just a decent one that could handle what he wanted to do. He started taking photos for school events. A teacher told him he had an eye. One of his friends asked him to take pictures for a birthday party. The fact that another kid wanted him there for something actually mattered more than the money, and I saw it in his face. I promised him that when he saved enough for half, I'd cover the other half as a holiday gift. He didn't ask me to. He didn't even want to believe me at first. But I said it because I needed him to know at least one adult could be counted on. The camera cost $1,200. My son saved $600 on his own over nearly 2 years. He was proud in that quiet way that makes you want to cry in the laundry room so you don't burden the kid with your feelings. When he finally hit his half, I ordered the camera online from a local electronics store and picked it up myself on my lunch break before my husband got home. Online checkout made me pay in full, so the plan was for my son to hand me his $600 from the lockbox after the holiday, because he liked the feeling of paying for it himself. I wrapped it late at night and hid it in my home office in the basement. I should have known better than to hide anything down there. He'd been looking for tape and holiday lights all week, wandering into my office like privacy was optional. Christmas morning, my son came downstairs with careful hope in his face. He opened the gift. His hands were shaking. Inside was a cheap hoodie and a basic photography book. He stared at it like he was trying to force reality to change. I felt my whole body go cold. I didn't even pretend. I looked around the room like the camera might be sitting on a shelf, like it might have grown legs and walked away. My husband watched me from the couch, too calm. My son swallowed hard and whispered, "Did I misunderstand?" "No," I said, voice tight. "You didn't." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A photo on a social media app. The nephew holding a camera. The camera, posted with a caption thanking my husband for coming through. I couldn't hear for a second, like my ears shut down to protect me. I walked to my husband, slow, because I didn't trust myself not to explode in front of our son. "Where is it?" I asked. He blinked. "Where's what?" "Don't," I said. "Where is the camera?" He hesitated for half a second. Then he straightened like he'd decided to commit to being right. "He needed it," he said. My son's face went pale. "Dad," he whispered. And it wasn't even angry. It was disbelief. I turned to my husband. "You stole from our son." "I didn't steal," he snapped. "I borrowed it. He has a project." "It's his," I said. "It's ours." My husband lifted his chin. "You paid for it. You can get another one." That sentence made me see red. Not because of the camera alone, but because of the casual way he dismissed my son's effort like it was pocket change. "And you went into his lockbox," I said, because I'd checked it. I'd found it open. The bill's missing. His eyes narrowed. "He's a kid. I know what's best." "You broke into your kid's lockbox," I said, voice cracking. "What is wrong with you? I used the money in his lockbox to reimburse you for his half, since you already paid for the whole thing. It's basically even," he said, like he'd solved a math problem. I checked the account later. There was no deposit, no reimbursement, nothing, just his word, used like a receipt. Even. My son made a sound like he'd been punched. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He just backed up and went upstairs and shut his door with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. I stood there shaking, staring at the man I married, and I realized something ugly. If I stayed, this would keep happening, just with different objects, different moments, different wounds. The pattern was him. That afternoon, I drove to my husband's brother's apartment with my son's receipt pulled up on my phone and my hands sweating on the steering wheel. I wasn't calm. I wasn't noble. I was furious and terrified and done. My husband's brother opened the door like he'd been expecting me. The nephew was inside on the couch, camera on his lap, scrolling through photos like he owned it. "Hey," the brother said. Too friendly. I didn't sit. "That camera is mine," I said. "It was bought for my son. I have the receipt. I need it back now." The nephew smirked. "Your husband gave it to me." "My husband does not have the right to give away property I purchased," I said. "Hand it over." The brother held up his hands. "Lindsay, don't do this. It's the holidays." "I'm doing it because it's the holidays," I snapped. "Because my kid is upstairs trying not to cry on a day he was supposed to feel loved." The brother's face shifted into judgment. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm reacting accurately." The nephew laughed, low. He's always been dramatic. That was the moment I stopped trying to handle it as a family misunderstanding. If they wanted to treat my kid like a joke, they could deal with something less funny. I called the non-emergency line and asked for a civil standby to retrieve my property. I didn't say family. I said what it was. Property taken without permission. Proof of purchase in hand. When an officer arrived, the brother looked like he might pass out. He kept saying, "It's a misunderstanding." The officer asked if I had proof. I showed the receipt. The officer asked where the item was. The nephew tried to act offended. The officer didn't care. "You need to return it," the officer said. Calm. The nephew's eyes flicked to his father. The brother's jaw clenched, but he nodded once, furious. The nephew shoved the camera into my hands like he was doing me a favor. I took it without saying thank you. I wasn't there to be polite. I was there to repair something my husband broke. I went home and knocked on my son's door. He opened it just enough to look at me, eyes red, trying to be tough. I held out the camera. His mouth fell open. "How?" "I went and got it," I said. He stared, and then his face crumpled. He hugged the camera to his chest like it was proof he mattered. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have done that sooner." He shook his head. "You did it," he said, voice raw. "You actually did it." Downstairs, my husband walked in and saw the camera in my son's hands. His face changed. Not guilt. Anger. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I protected our kid," I said. "Something you keep refusing to do." He stepped toward me. "You called the police on my family?" "I called for a civil standby," I said. "And yes, I did. Because your family took something that wasn't theirs and you stood there acting like it was normal." His voice got loud. "You embarrassed me." I laughed, sharp. "You embarrassed yourself. You just don't want consequences." He pointed upstairs. "You're turning him against me." "No," I said. "You did that. Every time you shrugged. Every time you said, 'It's fine.' Every time you chose them. You did that." He stormed out and didn't come back until late. That night I sat on the bathroom floor and cried until my ribs hurt. Because standing up for yourself isn't this glamorous thing in real life. It's scary. It's choosing a fight you know will change your life. A week later, he tried to act like we could move on. Like I'd had my meltdown and now we'd reset. I didn't reset. New Year's Eve came and he announced he was going to his brother's place, like it was already decided. I stood in the kitchen and said, "If you go, I'm filing." He laughed. "You're not serious." "I'm serious," I said. "I'm done. You can't threaten me with divorce every time you don't get your way," he snapped. "This isn't about my way," I said. "This is about our kid having a father who doesn't treat him like a spare." He stared at me like I'd become someone he didn't recognize. Maybe I had. He left anyway. On the morning of the first day of the year, I sat my son down at our kitchen table with 2 mugs of hot chocolate because I didn't know how else to make it feel safe. I told him I was filing for divorce. His face twisted. "Is it because of me?" "No," I said firmly. "It's because of him." He started crying anyway. Guilt poured out like it had been waiting. "I should have tried harder. I should have—" "Stop," I said, and I took his hands. "You were a kid. You tried so hard you started thinking you weren't worth basic kindness." "That is not on you." We spent that night on the couch, just the 2 of us, watching movies he picked and eating frozen pizza. It wasn't glamorous. It was peaceful. When my husband came home 2 days later, he tried to hug our son with that fake cheerfulness that always showed up when he wanted things to go back to normal. "Come on," he said. "Give me a hug." Our son stepped back. "No," he said, quietly but clearly. My husband looked at me like it was my fault. "See what you've done?" I handed him the papers from a local lawyer. I'd already met with her. I'd already opened a separate account and rerouted my direct deposit. I'd already stopped pretending one more conversation would fix a decade of behavior. He stared at the papers like they were written in another language. Then he went straight to paranoia, accusing me of cheating, because that's what people do when they can't face the real reason someone leaves. It's easier to blame a stranger than admit you failed your own kid. He moved into his brother's place and told everyone we were taking a break. His brother called me and tried to mediate like he was a wise elder instead of a man who had been happily living off my marriage. "Teenagers are dramatic," he said. "You're blowing this up." "I'm not discussing my marriage with you," I said. "Stay out of it." He tried again. "He should come stay here in the summer, learn discipline from his cousin." I clenched my jaw. "Do not contact my son," I said. "Ever." He hung up like I'd been rude, which was almost funny. At school, the nephew kept running his mouth. Little comments, little jokes. Stuff like, "Some people can't handle competition," and "Some moms are controlling." My son heard it, swallowed it, and then one day he came home and said, "I don't want to go to practice anymore." It wasn't just the words. It was the way the nephew said them, like he knew my son wouldn't fight back. I went to the school counselor. I didn't want a war. I wanted protection. The counselor documented it, talked to teachers, kept notes. My son wasn't a little kid, but he was still a kid. He deserved adults who didn't tell him to toughen up. By the time we reached court, my son was 16, old enough to be heard, old enough to say the truth without being dismissed as a toddler having a tantrum. In the hearing, he spoke clearly. He talked about the second kid comment at the barbecue when he was 13. He talked about the science project. He talked about the birthday with 2 cakes. He talked about the lockbox. He talked about how his dad used loyalty like a weapon. He didn't cry. He didn't act dramatic. He just told the truth. And listening to him, I felt both proud and sick, because no child should have to become that articulate about neglect. We also had the counselor's notes, messages where my husband tried to guilt him into being loyal, and a pattern of showing up unannounced and pushing past boundaries like they were optional. Nothing cinematic, just steady pressure that made my kid feel trapped. My husband tried to paint me as controlling and jealous. He tried to claim he deserved spousal support because, according to him, he'd turned down opportunities while I advanced. The truth was simpler. I'd stayed in my job and climbed slowly. He'd stayed in his and complained loudly. Still, he tried. The lawyer asked for bank statements. I provided them. Statement after statement. Transfers to his brother. Always 500. Money that should have been for our household rerouted to prop up his brother's chaos. And yes, the spousal support demand died right there in the daylight. Once the transfers were laid out and the pattern was clear, it turned into one of those quiet, humiliating losses where he couldn't argue without admitting what he'd done. He showed up at the school office without warning twice, insisting he had the right to just talk to our son, and the counselor documented it. Custody landed where it should have. My son stayed with me. Visits started supervised for a while, not because my husband was a monster in a movie, but because he had a pattern of emotional pressure and boundary stomping. And the court wasn't going to pretend that didn't matter. We did supervised visits at a community center, bland room, plastic chairs, a staff person whose whole job was to sit there and make sure grown adults didn't melt down. On the first visit, my husband tried small talk, then slid into guilt. We ended up doing more than one supervised visit, because the court wanted a pattern before they relaxed anything. The second time, my husband came in with a bag of snacks and tried to play fun dad, like the last years hadn't happened. He kept steering the conversation toward his brother and his nephew. "You should come by the apartment sometime," he told our son. "Your cousin misses you." My son looked at the supervisor before he looked at his dad. "No," he said. My husband smiled too hard. "See? That's your mother." The supervisor wrote something down. My husband noticed and got angry, then tried to pull it back with a joke. It was the same cycle in a smaller room, with witnesses. Watching it through that lens made it even clearer. He wasn't changing. He was just adapting his manipulation to the rules. After that, my son stopped agreeing to extra visits. He showed up when required, said what he needed to say, and left. I didn't coach him. I didn't push him. I just let him have that small power. "If your mother hadn't," he began, and the supervisor cleared her throat. My son looked at him and said, "Don't." My husband stared like he couldn't believe his kid had a spine. After that, visits were sparse. My husband would schedule, then cancel, then blame me, then schedule again. My son stopped feeling obligated to perform forgiveness. The house stayed with me. I refinanced to buy out my husband's portion, and it was stressful. I had to cut spending. I picked up extra shifts. I sold random stuff we didn't need. I ate more cheap pasta than any adult should admit. But the first night after the paperwork was final, when my son sat at the kitchen table editing photos, camera beside him, and the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel tense, just quiet. I knew it was worth it. The school started requiring visits to be coordinated through me because once the court paperwork existed, they weren't going to let him treat the front office like a revolving door. My husband hated that. He kept trying to show up like he still had the same access. He didn't. A few months later, my son joined a small media club. He took photos at games. He helped a teacher put together a little exhibit in the hallway. One of his friends started asking him to come over again, just to hang out, and I realized the neglect had almost stolen that from him too, his ability to believe other people wanted him around. The nephew, meanwhile, did get his scholarship offer that spring during his senior year. Not a full-ride fantasy, but a solid athletic offer that made adults clap and post and act like it was proof my husband had been right all along. The difference was my husband wasn't getting applause anymore. He'd spent years pouring into them, and now that I'd shut off the joint account and he was paying his own bills on his own, his brother's tone changed. His brother stopped answering calls unless money was involved. The nephew started posting vague captions about protecting my peace and cutting off negativity, like my husband was the one who'd done something wrong by needing help. My husband had worshipped loyalty, and loyalty turned out to be a one-way street. One evening, my husband showed up in the parking lot outside my store right after my shift. I saw him through the glass and felt my stomach flip. My boss noticed and asked if I wanted him to call someone. It was the same coworker who'd said, years earlier, "They don't treat you right." And somehow he'd become the person at work who actually had my back. I said no. Just stand nearby. My husband looked smaller than he used to, not physically, just defeated. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. I crossed my arms. "About what?" He swallowed. "They don't answer me." I stared at him. "Who?" "My brother. My nephew," he said, voice rough. "I did everything for them." "And you did it at the cost of your kid," I said. He flinched. "I didn't mean, you never mean it," I snapped. "You just do it." He looked like he might cry, and I felt nothing like the satisfaction people imagine. I felt tired. I felt like a person who carried something heavy for too long and finally set it down. A week later, my son had a game at a community gym, one of those weekend showcases where multiple teams rotate through and the bleachers fill up with whoever has nothing better to do. The kind of rivalry that's normal until it's personal. Across the gym, I saw the nephew in the other bleachers, laughing with friends. My son's breathing changed. He stepped off the court during a break and walked to the hallway, head down. I followed, not rushing, just being there. He leaned against the wall and put a hand on his chest. "I'm okay," he said quickly, like he didn't want to be a problem. "I know," I said. "Breathe anyway." He took a slow breath, then another. He looked at me and said, "I don't miss him." I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Your dad?" He nodded. "I miss the idea of him, but not him." "That makes sense," I said, and my throat burned. When the game ended, our team won by a small margin. Nothing dramatic, no miracle buzzer shot. Just a win. My son didn't gloat. He smiled, tired, and came straight to me. He didn't look across the gym for approval. He just existed in his own life. On the drive home, he told me he got an email that afternoon. A local scholarship accepted his portfolio. It wasn't huge money, but it was something. Proof that effort could lead somewhere without someone else deciding your worth. I parked in our driveway and sat there for a second, hands on the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. My son unbuckled and said, "Thanks for getting the camera back." I swallowed. "I should have done it sooner," I said. He shrugged. Like he didn't want to get too sentimental. "You did it," he said. "That's what matters." That night, after he went upstairs, I stood in my kitchen and looked around. Same counters, same floors, same life on the outside. But the air felt different, like it wasn't waiting for someone to explode. My husband didn't get a redemption arc. He got reality. He still tried occasionally to send apologies that sounded like they were written to make him feel better, not to make amends. My son didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. About a year after everything settled, the school hosted a community night. Parents walked the halls and looked at projects. The media club set up an exhibit of student photos, and my son had 3 prints on the wall. One was a picture of our backyard after rain, sunlight catching the edge of a leaf. One was a shot of his friend's little brother mid-jump on a trampoline. The last one was simple. Our kitchen table with 2 mugs and a pile of homework. Warm light. Ordinary life. A teacher stood nearby and told people, "This student has a really strong eye." I watched strangers nod and smile at my son's work, and I felt my chest ache in a good way. This was what he should have been getting at home the whole time. Someone looking at him with pride that wasn't conditional. My husband showed up late. I didn't invite him, but someone must have told him. He stood at the end of the hallway, hands in his pockets, staring at the photos like they were proof of something he couldn't undo. He didn't come closer. He didn't start a fight. He just looked. My son saw him, paused, then turned back to his friends and kept talking, like his life didn't have to stop to accommodate his father's feelings anymore. That, more than any courtroom paper, felt like closure. And if you're wondering where the triumph is, it wasn't me humiliating anyone at a party. It was smaller, and honestly, better. It was my kid laughing again. It was him taking photos without flinching. It was me not checking my bank app like I was waiting for a new betrayal. The win was walking into my house and feeling safe. Not perfect, just ours. And after everything, that felt like revenge enough.